Today on the MotoMan Podcast, we learn some discover their calling later in life. Others know early and never let go.
I was always fascinated by sports cars, so it was kind of a lifelong mission, but it isn't something you get fed with a silver spoon.
Modern cars are engineered to hit numbers, efficiency, output, all balanced against regulations. But today's guest believes that's exactly where many products lose their soul.
I'd love to do an exterior, so I asked my boss if it was okay to contribute something to this project, and they said no, because that's only for interior, and I didn't really take that no for an answer, so stayed up late a couple of nights at work and built up a couple of 3D models of what I think the next Gallardo should look like.
Then we're reminded design is often treated as decoration, something applied after the real decisions are made. And when that happens, vision becomes compromised before the first sketch is even finished.
Fundamentally, I'm working for the kind of a 12-year-old kid inside each one of our customers, and the eventual 12-year-old kid who's going to buy a poster or a scale model and hopefully catch that bug, catch that passion, catch that disease that I caught when I was little.
So belt in, because this is a rare inside look at the tension between engineering logic and creative intent from someone who has lived it.
Well, I mean, the way I see it, we only have one shot at this, so if there's obstacles, respectfully navigate them instead of surrendering.
Sasha, I have spoken to many designers in my time. However, I have never spoken to a designer like you. And I think to qualify that statement, you need to, right from the get-go, give us a highlight of your resume of the cars you sketched that became real cars.
Okay, that became real cars. Well, I guess Lamborghini Huracan was my first experience of bringing something to production. Joined Lamborghini team in the late 2000s for that project. After that, it was Bugatti Chiron exterior, where I was already responsible for exterior design at Bugatti. A couple of other Bugatti projects under my belt as well. Then went to Genesis, was heading up advanced design at Genesis. Did the Essentia concept, is something I'm very proud of. Then moved over to Koenigsegg, and Gemera and CC850 were the two projects I did there. And most recently founded my own sports car company together with my wife, Nilu 27. And as we speak, we're bringing a mid-engine, 12-cylinder, naturally aspirated, all-manual hypercar to the market with our new company.
Again, I've spoken to a lot of designers. I don't even know where to begin to unpack that. Let's start with this. Many people, you went to Art Center?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, so someone goes to Art Center, they're over the moon to get a job at like Nissan or Genesis.
Nissan's a great company.
Great company. Yeah. But you design Lamborghinis and Gemeras.
Right.
What's involved in getting to that level? Is it luck or like, no, I'm doing this and this only?
Well, I've always known kind of from the beginning, and I guess from early childhood that is, that I really want to build sports cars. I was always fascinated by sports cars, so it was kind of a lifelong mission, but it isn't something you get fed with a silver spoon. It isn't like that at all. So I joined Volkswagen after graduating Art Center, went to Germany and spent the first 5 years or so working on pretty mundane VWs, all the while dreaming of doing a sports car. And I had a pretty mixed run with working on mundane VWs. I was a young designer, a bit of a hothead, so got into arguments and fights with everyone around me. And I had pretty poor traction, I would say, in the beginning of my career. And then I did a couple of proposals for a Lamborghini project that were shoved in the back of a presentation folder, and Walter de Silva saw those, started flipping the booklet from the wrong side, and first thing he saw were the couple of exteriors that I did, and didn't even realize they were mine. Just saw the images, loved them. At that time, we were being in a bit of a conflict, so it's good that he didn't realize those were mine, but he loved the images, and then, from there on, endorsed me and then helped me work on all these sports car projects. But I'm really cutting it very, very short in my narrative right now. It was a massive uphill struggle.
So how old were you at that point?
Mid-20s.
So mid-20s, are you still working in the Volkswagen design studio? Or
Yeah.
how does that happen? How do you put a sketch in for a Lamborghini? Because I do understand design enough to know that you can compete with different worldwide studios, but only within the brand.
Well, Volkswagen Group is obviously a large, company with plenty of brands under its umbrella, and Lamborghini being one of them. Lamborghini at the time had a relatively small and not fully complete Centro Stile in Sant'Agata Bolognese, and they often asked other design studios of Volkswagen Group for help. And they reached out to our studio because we had a very, very powerful interior design department. And they said, can you guys please sketch a few interior ideas? And when I saw the interior guys sketching away on those interiors, I just thought, well, I'd love to do an exterior. So I asked my boss if it was okay to contribute something to this project. And they said no, because that's only for interior. And I didn't really take that no for an answer. So stayed up late a couple of nights at work and built up a couple of 3D models of what I think the next Gallardo should look like. And then when I showed them to my bosses, they said, well, those look great. Why don't we just put them at the final page of that presentation and send it over to Walter de Silva for review? And if he ends up browsing through all the pages and finally sees yours, well, then so be it. But if he kind of stops with the interiors and doesn't pay attention at what's at the bottom, then that's also a chance, But he started from the wrong sides.
Something tells me one of the themes in your life is you don't take no for an answer.
Well, I mean, the way I see it, we only have one shot at this. So if there's obstacles, respectfully navigate them instead of surrendering.
So let's step back. We'll come back to the whole Lamborghini thing, but formative years. I'm guessing you are from very, very East LA.
You could say that.
Yeah. So tell us where you grew up and how you got here.
I was born in Tbilisi, Georgia, Soviet Union. I kind of spent the first years of my life there. It was a wonderful city, great childhood memories, but relatively low income, poor family, but lots of fun. My parents were very young. They had me when they were 20 years old. Great childhood there. And then after Soviet Union fell apart and things became pretty rough, my dad went to Moscow, and soon after that brought the rest of the family with him to Moscow. So between the ages of 10 and 17, I lived in Moscow. When I was 17, I got accepted to Art Center. So that's where.
So growing up in basically Russia, and you were there kind of post wall coming down.
Yeah.
Were you a car guy? Because it's not really a car culture, at least pre-wall.
Yeah, so pre-wall, I was too young, really. I mean, my first word my parents tell me was car when I was little, and second was red. So I guess I did have it for sports cars that are red from childhood. I did have a brief love affair with jet fighters, as every Soviet kid would. Drew them all the time. And then during the whole Soviet Union falling apart, kind of fiasco, debacle, nightmare, I saw a little bit of Russian military in action and became a lifelong pacifist. So kind of divorced myself from anything with a military application, got fully disillusioned in jet fighters. And that was also when that little military debacle was happening. We spent a few days over at my grandparents' house where I found an old car magazine, or I think it was probably not even a car magazine, just Final Pages had a little bit of Formula One reporting. And I found a picture of Gilles Villeneuve's 126 Ferrari with number 27 on it. And that kind of brought me back to my roots as a car kid, car guy. I was very young back then. I was probably 7 years old. And
So may I be so bold to ask, is what was the issue? What specific military issue was going on there?
It was a couple of things. So first, Georgia wanted independence from Soviet Union, effectively from Russia, and Russia brought their troops and tanks and military into Tbilisi's main square. We lived not far away from there, so we saw all these very peaceful protesters being, some of them gunned down, others driven over by tanks, so that wasn't a pleasant sight. And then once Georgia did gain their independence, they had an internal conflict with lots of shooting and lots of guns, lots of tanks, lots of cannons in the streets. And I just remember running around collecting bullet shells as a kid and seeing corpses here and there. It wasn't much fun. So
I mean, this is an unusual upbringing. What child thinks to go to collect bullet shells?
all of us at the street back then.
Was that a game you made?
Yeah, well, the most sought after ones were the ones that weren't used up, so the intact ones.
So instead of collecting Matchbox cars, you collect bullets.
For like a couple of weeks during that whole little mini civil war they had, yeah.
And your therapy was car magazines.
Well, yeah, that was therapeutic. Finding a picture of a kind of a tip-up front three-quarter of that Gilles car with kind of it was power sliding or drifting out a corner, and it just looked more dramatic and more emotional and more fulfilling than any jet fighter, really. And I think that's down to the fact that, first of all, it wasn't designed to kill people, although inadvertently that particular car did kill its star driver. But yeah, it wasn't designed to kill people, but also it had stands. Well, I always hated those little tiny shopping cart wheels on jet fighters. Mm-hmm. Never wanted to finish the assembly instructions for the scale kits because of those stupid little wheels.
Well, you want to keep the gear up, of course.
You want to keep the gear up. But then finally, when you see that Formula One car with its insane massive tires and the epic stance and the way it kind of plants itself, I realized that's what I liked all along. That's why I hated those tiny little shopping cart wheels, because no stands.
So as a pilot, can weigh in here. There's like a trend. It's been for a while where people build these kit planes, like a kit fox is a big one people do. And they come with these like smaller wheels on them.
Right.
But guys like up in Alaska or in Utah, they put these crazy balloon tires on it, and they look bad.
They look awesome, yeah.
Granted, it gives you a little bit more functionality, but I think it's almost to like a caricature size.
Right.
And I have a bush plane, and I think I kind of want to buy a bush plane, although it would look ridiculous on a Cessna. Anyway, this whole therapy of the magazine, we'll come back to it because it kind of shapes where you are now.
Yeah, it does.
So let's go back to Lamborghini. Actually, before we go to Lamborghini, there was another formative part of your life that happened kind of around that time and going to Art Center. Who came into your life at that point?
Well, I had a lot of great mentors and instructors at Art Center, but I guess the most formative experience was interning at Derek Jenkins's studio in Simi Valley for Volkswagen. I learned a lot from him and from that experience. Yeah, that was cool.
He was in that very chair. Longtime friend.
That's awesome.
He is probably your biggest fan. He has a lot of positive things to say about
That's very kind of him, and it's mutual. I love the guy. He's cool.
Yeah, how could you not? Guy builds his own dune buggy and his own house.
Yeah, he's got great taste.
But there was another formative relationship. I don't know if it was before Art Center or around Art Center time. You, and I don't mean cars.
Then what were we talking about?
Your wife.
My wife. Yeah, sure. That's a very formative relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. We didn't meet when we were like 3 years old. First time our families know each other, and they ended up by accident vacationing together at the Black Sea. So ended up bumping into each other back there. And then once I came out to Art Center, actually her uncle is my parents' best friend. They went to school together. So her uncle was my legal guardian because I was still 17 years old and didn't have the the authority to sign my own field trip papers from school. So he would have to do that, and he took great care of me, and his family was kind of my adopted home when I first came out here. And then I met her at his house already as a young adult. So we started dating when we were 17 years old, and we're still together and did a lot of fun stuff together over the years. Started a family in Germany, of all places, and have two teenagers now as kids, and started a car company together too. So it's been a pretty wild ride and a huge adventure. And in an interesting way, because we met so early on, we kind of shaped each other, and I don't think that both of us are pretty, I wouldn't call it stubborn, but set in our ways. And if we had met later in our lives, I don't think it would have worked. It's the fact that we met as kids, basically, that paved the way.
And what's the avenue that got you to Art Center? How does a kid in Georgia learn about this small, I'm from New York. I love cars. I was sketching cars in my high school notebook, but no one told me about Art Center.
Yeah. So yeah, it was a good story as well. I mean, I was always drawing cars like you, and a couple of other kids in my school as well. We just always sketched cars as long as I can remember. And my parents were very encouraging from early age of both my brother and I in terms of our hobbies. And later on, they were encouraging in terms of turning those hobbies into professions. And because they grew up in an environment where their own hobbies were not relevant, you know, in the Soviet Union, you basically had the party assign profession to you. Well, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but there was really a strong push on a kind of a government level that Soviet Union needs doctors or needs engineers or needs technicians. And that's what the entire kind of populace would then aspire to become. There was no, oh, but I'm dreaming of this type of approach to careers. And I think my parents were denied the sort of creative careers that both of them could have excelled at. And that's why they encouraged my brother and I to pursue those creative careers. And my brother turned into a well-accomplished and renowned composer and a musician. So that's an unusual career choice.
Still in Russia?
No, out here in California. I moved after the war started, opposition to the war. But
sounds like your parents were incredibly proactive in, as most parents, they want to create a better life for their children, but they went to very great lengths, sending you out of what they thought was not the right place to be, in addition to pushing you into these creative...
That's not necessarily fair. Late 90s were very good time for Russia in my perspective and in my parents' perspective. It was a time of liberty, of free speech, of free press, of vocal opposition and dissent to the government, in which we always partook. So it was at that point in time, we had no idea that there were risks of authoritarian regime and the kind of situation the country's in right now. So the decision to send me out on my own to Art Center was not driven by any kind of politics. It was driven first, foremost, and only by my creative aspirations to become a car designer. And my parents saving up money and not buying an apartment and giving me their entire life savings as a kind of
a
study bank
sacrifice.
account. Yeah, huge. And sending me off on my way to study what it is that I dreamed of studying. My mom actually wrote a letter to Ferrari, a paper letter, and when I was still in high school, and said, my son keeps drawing your cars, and where should he study car design? And we received a reply from them with 5 or 6 schools, a couple of Italian schools, a couple of schools in the States, CCS and Art Center. I started desperately to learn Italian in my hopes to be closer to the Mecca there. But my English was already far better at that point in time, and the decision was made simply based on what language I was more comfortable with. And
the 90s was a fascinating time for Eastern Europe in particular. I don't pretend to know what was going on in Russia, but I had the opportunity to live over in Europe, Germany in particular. So went over to the east side as well as went to what was the Slovak Republic.
Right.
And the experience was something different because it was just kind of coming out of that melees of being communism, and people were excited, but the realities hadn't kind of hit them yet. There was a lot of change going on, and you could see the pace of change moving. What was the story in Russia in relation to that?
Yeah, Russians see the 90s as a complicated time. I think a lot of the freedoms that were won by the brave few who resisted Soviet Union weren't necessarily appreciated and embraced by the greater majority. You could say that the virtue of those freedoms was probably not well communicated to the rest of the populace. So there were, let's say, the ideological leaders of the freedom movement, of the perestroika and later the capitalist transformation and the freedoms that came with that. But the majority of people felt uncertainty, decline in their standards of living, lawlessness, crime. And these confusing times are used today by the current regime to basically demand full authority and full power for themselves to control things. And in some way, maybe the old school ex-Soviet people feel like that's the right way of running a country. But those of us who experienced the freedom and appreciated the free speech are certainly left with a very sad and a bitter feeling about the fork in the road and the alternative path not taken.
Pick 3 things that you learned from that period that you've taken as like a teaching moment and applied to how you live your life today. Could be in your how you handle your business, your career, a father.
I think that it was the environment that would be closest to what Wild Wild West was out here. It was Wild Wild East over there, and that kind of recalibrates your mind in a way that you see structures as non-permanent but flexible. A no is not really anything to worry about. So
that makes you more of a risk taker.
I'm more of a risk taker. I don't know how much of it is my own personal nature and how much of it is maybe inspired by what I've seen around me, but I do have an issue with authority, especially when that authority is not articulate and communicating its reasoning to me. I don't just take instructions from anyone. I would probably be a terrible soldier if I were to have ever joined military. I like things both ways in terms of authority explaining things to me. I require that, and as a figure of authority in some scenarios in my life, I over-explain and over-rationalize because I imagine that the person on the other end receiving my feedback or my instructions deserves the same level of transparency that I demand from those above me.
And how did that translate to working, say, at a Volkswagen group as opposed to working at Koenigsegg?
Yeah, interesting. At Volkswagen, I had a great time. The structures are rigid, but they always saw me as a guy who wears his heart on his sleeve and someone who's honest and very straightforward. And they've always carved out exceptions and niches for me.
So you could say the authority figures there took the time, explained it to you respectfully of what the boundaries and parameters were.
Not at first. But after a few years, after my ability and my skill set and eventually my contribution became obvious to the higher ups, yes, they would go out of their way to explain and sometimes very carefully listen to my opinion and invite me to decision-making moments, which I really appreciated. So yeah, with time, things really fell into place at Volkswagen for me. They really did fall out of place again after the diesel scandal and after the entire management of the company was switched around. That's why I ended up leaving actually and going to Genesis. But sort of a sweet spot for me was, I would say, between joining the company in 2005, struggling a little bit until the 2010s, and then a great sort of honeymoon period later in my Volkswagen career was between 2010 and 2016.
So after the Huracan, what were you doing there?
After the Huracan, I was, even before the Huracan, I was already involved with Bugatti. And after the Huracan, I got re-engaged with Bugatti, received a promotion, became head of exterior design.
First? They picked that sketch for the Huracan first, then you went to Bugatti?
Yeah, that's kind of coincidence. Two things happened around very similar time frames. First, they picked that sketch for the Huracan. I started working on the Huracan, and alongside that, I was sketching away on what would become the Bugatti Chiron with about, 20 other designers participating in the competition. And my quarter scale was also picked for that, but the project was then put on ice because the company was focusing on a four-door Galibier sedan. So that initial sketch model, quarter scale, well, it was liked, but it was never made into a production car. The time wasn't right. So I had that window opportunity to pursue the Lambo side of things. And when I was done with Lambo, the Galibier was going through difficult kind of development phase, and there was a push to restart the development of the Chiron, and I reminded everyone that my quarter scale model was the winner of the previous round, and I got an opportunity to build a full-size model of that, and yeah, kind of.
And did this see you going to the studios in Italy or Bugatti?
Yeah, it was actually Italy in my case. Walter De Silva was personally managing that project, and he assigned me first with Centro Stile in Sant'Agata to go there for Lamborghini, and after that was done, I had a talk with him and Achim Anscheit, Bugatti chief designer, and it was decided that the Chiron, in order to not distract away from the Galibier development, would be handled in Italy. So then I was again in Italy for a couple of more years working on that Chiron project.
Specifically the Chiron, one of the things I thought was very successful about that car, it cleaned up some of the weight that was in the design of the Veyron.
Yeah.
Specifically in the rear.
Right.
And you can kind of see a little bit of that in the Tourbillon today, and definitely in the front was cleaned up a bit.
Right.
Is that something that you specifically were focusing on, or what were you trying to do with the Chiron?
Yeah, good question. So I have a tremendous amount of respect for Josef Kaban, the designer who did the exterior of the Veyron. He kind of comes from a very classical Volkswagen design tradition, very Bauhaus, very graphically neat and organized, and what he does, really appreciated. But in my mind, when we're talking about a hyper sports car, the Bauhaus philosophy needs to be shifted because form follows function, right? And we cannot just treat it as if it were an Audi TT because the function is so different. The Veyron is going over 400 kilometers per hour, has 1,000 horsepower. So the aero requirements and the kind of packaging that I envisioned for a hypersports car was not really done right on the Veyron, in my opinion. The car was... there are some objective reasons why it looks the way it does. For example, the transmission is in a tunnel, which effectively means the driver and the passenger sit further apart, which means the cabin is very wide. But there are also some stylistic reasons that the team, including Josef, did on that car that were driven simply by trying to make things as neat as possible. And they, for example, made the cabin slightly wider than it could have been, just to make sure that there's a very nice sort of section between the door and the side glass and stuff like that. So what I wanted to do is to inject more performance car DNA into the Veyron's architecture. Respect, obviously, its packaging. Yeah, the transmission stays in the tunnel. The engine is gigantic. It requires insane amount of cooling. So those are the hard parameters we have to work with, but I still wanted to bring a little bit more performance car DNA into the proportions, into the sections. I fought like hell for those bigger wheels. That was one of the main things that I'm very happy that the team was able to achieve, and I personally spearheaded that effort. Veyron rode on the Pax tires, Michelin bulletproof, basically Pax tires, run flat technology. And the curious thing about those tires is that the front, I'm going to get really nerdy right now, the front wheel sidewall.
That's what we do here.
All right, good. The front wheel's sidewall. Yeah, the sidewall. The amount of rubber on that front wheel was actually bigger than the sidewall size on the rear wheel. That is wrong.
That's unusual.
The front wheel is smaller than the rear wheel and yet still has bigger sidewall than the rear wheel sidewall. What that does, though, to your eye, when you look at the car, imagine the bottom of the rim on the front always looks higher up than on the rear because there's simply more rubber under that front rim than on the rear. So the whole car looks nose up. No matter what chassis configuration you're in, just the amount of black under the rim kills the aesthetics of that front wheel and the stance. So not only did we switch to bigger rim diameter for both front and rear, 20 and 21, we also fixed that sidewall issue. I would love to tell you that it's all about the design, it's all about the sections that we use, it's all about the proportions and improvements, but I would say 80% of the looks come from that one simple decision that we have good, correct tire specs on that car.
It amazes me how very small details can completely change a car. Like, for example, before we get started, we were joking around about the cars we drive, and you're like, as long as you don't drive a GT3 RS, I'm like, uh-oh. And one of the things I changed on the car was the daylight opening trim.
Okay.
That car comes standard with the black trim, but I spec the satin finish trim. And to this day, the car's 2 years old now, to this day, I have people come up to me and they say, why does that car look so different? And no one knows, but it's that daylight opening.
That's a good point. It's subliminal. All of it is subliminal.
Yeah.
I mean, as a designer, we kind of dissect things, and I really do know what comes from what. But for an average person just seeing the car, the perception of health, the perception of beauty, the perception of performance, of value, of quality, all these are subliminal perceptions.
So you've had the experience, by this point, you've had the experience of working at Volkswagen, and you're at Lamborghini and Bugatti. Is it handled differently when you're at a studio like a Bugatti, where a Volkswagen, they may say, okay, well, we're doing this and we got to cut budget here and cut budget here. Is Bugatti like, take your time, let's do this, or the engineers run the show? How is it different?
I mean, everyone in their respective seat thinks they have it the most stressful, right? So if you called in a Bugatti designer right now, they would tell you, no, we're crazy, we're running around, it's so much stress, and we're so on the time limits and deadlines. I have the luxury of being able to compare. And I do have to say that the Bugatti experience was wonderful in many ways, including the fact that we did take a bit more time. We did take a bit more time to do things right.
Okay, so
there wasn't the
lower
man with a whip
production
kind of
gave you the luxury of time.
I think the lower production plus the fact that for Volkswagen, Bugatti is not the main breadwinner. Mm-hmm. So they see Bugatti, or while they owned Bugatti, they saw Bugatti as kind of a playground for good ideas and ambitious new developments and that sort of stuff. So yeah, we as designers dreamed of putting a car on the road, but at times it felt like the rest of the company would be just as happy kind of continuing R&D without bringing something to the road. And of course, when the project became serious and real resources were connected, it did change. But the earlier phases of kind of pre-development were just creative time, which is a luxury we don't normally get.
In considering the car, were the engineers more in charge of the design, or was it, look, we're making it look like this, you figure out your crap on your own?
So a bit of both, actually. The way that worked was Ferdinand Piëch had a lot of say in what those
He had a
cars
lot of
looked
say in
like.
everything.
Yeah, but especially with Bugatti, he was very, very hands-on. And just as with the Veyron, same with the Chiron, he saw a design model.
Did your time overlap?
Yeah,
I got to tell you, I'm kind of jealous. He's the guy I wanted to meet.
yeah, it's too late for that, I guess.
Yeah, clearly, but that's
Yeah, it's
awesome.
quite
that
something.
Work
Yeah,
was happening.
yeah. I did once present to him and got some feedback from him. And I was the only person in the studio, which was quite an intimate setting. So it was a pretty incredible.
What was he like? Was he like you and I talked about the gift of clarity, or was he quiet?
Certainly gift of clarity, but it was very one-directional and very straight shooter. And why did you do this? Oh, Mr. Piëch, because of this and that. Don't do this. So it was, yeah.
So you as the kid that grew up in Georgia that doesn't like authority, did you talk back to the guy and you're like, or did you say like, "Si patron" or whatever?
No, see, the thing with him is when you have someone entering the room who developed the Audi Quattro and the 917 Porsche and spearheaded all these incredible projects for Volkswagen, and in my book ranks as probably one of the top engineers ever. I was more in the mode of I was probably more in the mode of just soaking it in and enjoying the opportunity to speak with a great man and get some feedback from him.
So you had the presence of mind to know that was a formative moment for you.
Oh yeah, absolutely, 100%. It was I was put on the spot a little bit that day. I did meet him a couple of times before and a couple of times after, but that day I was told that he's coming into the studio when nobody else was in the house and that I should be make myself ready to present. All of a sudden the door opened, he walked in, and I was by coincidence, by chance, wearing a Ferrari jacket, which then he came up to, he grabbed me by the collar and said, "You're a brave boy," or "You're a brave guy," or something like that. And I didn't know what he was referring to because I'd forgotten that I was wearing this hoodie. I looked down, I saw the Ferrari badge on it, and I was like, sorry about that. But he was fine. That was a bit of a joke. Then he said, "Show me the car." And I went over to the car and showed him some of the updates we did on the design side and got a couple of bits of feedback.
Which car was it?
The Chiron development, yeah. Got a couple of bits of feedback from him. He was very mild. He was generally very happy with the car, so that also is the reason he was mild. I've seen him in some meetings far from that level of tranquility, but I had it easy on that day, and he thanked me, shook my hand, and left after about 15 minutes. That was that.
So we didn't spend a lot of time talking about Lamborghini. So your sketch became the Huracan.
Oh, that's a bit of an exaggeration. My sketch became a successful full-size model that was then pitted against the output from the design team in Italy. Cars were quite different. Then they got slightly more similar in the next rounds, and then Walter da Silva said, "Look, the Italians will win it just because they are the brand. But your car had so much influence on where this project has gone. Why don't you go there and join the team and become part of that story?" Which I really appreciated.
So the sketch basically got you the job. That was the job interview.
Right.
And what else did you do there?
Well, I went there for the development of the Huracan and spent the entire time together with the team building, changes to the body side, to the front, to the rear, cabin
So you
architecture.
did all the different special editions.
No. We did the actual car that came out as the production car, but to arrive there, we obviously tried, a whole variety of different solutions before that became final. And while I was there, also I contributed to a couple of advanced design projects, show cars that came out. But the main purpose of my being there was the exterior of the Huracan. And once that was design freeze, then I was back in Germany.
So what goes into the decision of, okay, I'm going to leave these two storied brands and I'm going to go to this upstart Korean luxury car company?
Yeah, I still wonder about that.
I'm going to tell John you said that.
No, I did have a great run at Bugatti and prior to that at Lambo. And by then already sort of late 2015, it really felt like Volkswagen Group was kind of my home. I knew almost everyone and in the design side and the engineering side. And I had a great time navigating between those different brands. I was tied formally to Bugatti, but I still had a permission to work on other brands' projects because I still had my one foot in the door with group design. So that meant that if there was an exciting project, and for example, there was a project with Audi that I was a part of, that I was sent for to Ingolstadt for a few months, which was cool. I really enjoyed it. But then the diesel scandal happened, a lot of the management changed, and that kind of told me, well, look, you can start rebuilding relationships with new people who are coming in, or maybe that's also a sign for, change is good. Maybe you're too comfortable. Maybe you are, feeling a little bit like somewhere, at your uncle's house,
Yeah.
a bit too comfy. So
I got to ask a personal question here, because I feel like as we're starting to get to know each other more, we've met before, and I saw your car, which we'll get to. I met your wife. I feel like you and I are kind of kindred spirits in that we don't, in like big organizations, we don't play nicely with others. Like, I was in the tech world for many years. While you were doing this, I sadly was working at tech. I mean, granted, I started at a very small computer company you never heard of called Apple.
okay,
Worked my way up from there. So I learned the whole
that's amazing.
the corporate world from there. Then I went into the internet world, fixed internet. I went to the mobile internet. But I didn't really excel until I got to the small company world, until I got to the startup world, where this, like, I think you and I like to push. You don't have to put. Am I correct?
Absolutely.
Thinking that.
What else? Push is the main word.
So, would you characterize yourself as a guy like maybe you do better in small environments? Maybe there was a struggle in the big environments.
See, I didn't know about that until I got to Koenigsegg. I always thought, well, the reality of car company is this. And then, what's the point of complaining? Because that's just how you go about making cars. So I did fight, and I did have issues with the organizations, and especially with the whole engineering and design sync. Because especially at a company like Volkswagen, it's so engineering driven. Design is seen as a candy wrapper quite often. Like, okay, we've got this figured out. Now you guys do your magic. Sprinkle some of
put
that
a nice wrapper on this thing.
Beauty dust on it, and then that's done. But of course, as a designer, you don't want to see yourself as just a cake baker, decorator, hairdresser type. You want to be involved in car architecture. You want to talk.
Wow, that's a hell of a description.
No disrespect to any of those aforementioned career choices, but I did want to meddle with architecture and engineering and packaging, and have a little bit more say in what the product is, right? Not just what it looks like, but what is this product? And at Volkswagen, that was very much the domain of the engineering, which is curious because they don't have the product in mind. They have their own engineering targets in mind. So effectively, the product vision, in my opinion, should actually reside with the designer. Because the designer doesn't just have the pretty things in mind. They also understand who is the customer. How are they going to use this? What are the important topics? Is for this particular car performance more important than comfort, or vice versa? Engineers have numerical targets. They don't have qualitative targets. They have quantitative targets. So I think that the old school way of working, and that's part of what German car industry is going through right now, is engineers need to execute the vision that comes probably from design. Not their own internal vision, because that's just, again, numerical and in value, not qualitative. So,
would you say that's one of the big drivers why you went to a Genesis, which didn't have the cachet of, oh my God, Bugatti?
Well, part of the reason I went to Genesis was the fact that they hired a lot of the top talent from Volkswagen Group, including Luc Donkerwolke, who I was very closely aligned with back then. And when he said, why don't you come join me? It's a design-driven company. I thought, well, that's maybe exactly what I was dreaming of, is this design-driven company thing. Not quite my cup of tea when it comes to the way the company was working and organized.
Which studio were you in?
They actually opened up a new studio for me. I was in charge of advanced design globally, but with residence in Frankfurt.
Okay.
So as a new team, I had the luxury of bringing my own friends and workforce, my top talents with me from other companies that I worked at before, and building up this wonderful unit.
So you were the boss at this point?
Yeah, well, my first experience being quote unquote the boss was probably at Bugatti still, where I was heading up exteriors. But this was a whole new level of responsibility, because not only are you heading up a topic, you're also in charge of a group of people.
So you get there. Is there something we could point out and say, Sasha did that?
Well, we worked on a few show cars while I was there that kind of set the direction for the brand Genesis as far as the visual identity is concerned. All the design cues that are now on production cars were...
So there's like those lights.
Yeah. the twin lights front and back, the crest grille, the so-called parabolic line for the shoulder, like all these things. And the one show car that I'm personally very proud of, and I had the most hands-on kind of input into, was the Essentia concept.
Oh, I know the car.
Yeah, that one. Yeah. So that was my team and I, and obviously working closely with our colleagues in Korea, but we owned that development, and that was something that was done in our team exterior-wise. Interior was a Californian designer, but he came over to Germany and worked in our team, but he brought his interior vision with him from Cali.
So when you got there, Luke said to you, design-driven company. I would argue he's right, because it's amazing. The Koreans are unusually good at pilfering the best talent and fostering a good environment there. But what was the reality when you got on the ground? What did you learn when you got there?
You know what didn't work for me, and I don't want to throw anything or anyone under the bus, but what didn't work for me was the sheer scale and size of the company. Where you want to get to the decision maker and you speak to one engineer and they don't know, so then they pass you over to someone else and they don't know. It's this kind of hive mind mentality where there isn't like that one guy who gets understands the project, gets where you're coming from, and together you can hash it out and make those decisions and high five each other, walk away, and there's the car. There's a lot of hive mind going on, and that's exactly why I started to realize, the scale is an issue. I want to work in a smaller company. I want to be part of a more dedicated, skunk worksy crew that has a clear objective and just delivers to that objective.
And they are famous, both Hyundai and Genesis, famous for the pace that they move at.
Yeah, radical.
Did you thrive in that environment? It seems like that would be a thing you would like.
Yes and no. I like moving at a very high pace, but I like moving at a clear target. The fact that there was also a shift in targets all the time, and the fact that nobody really owned those targets, and they were just kind of every day we run, but we could be running exactly where we came from yesterday, just because today the marching orders are that way. I can't, you know what I mean? Like I need to have a very clear understanding of where we're going, why we're going there, commitment to the cause, commitment to the process, and then the pace can be breakneck, no problem with that, but I need that clarity.
So what was the total time of your tenure there?
I think just under 3 years.
And then where'd you go from there?
Well, I left without really knowing where I would go, because I figured, well, this isn't it. We also had an insane amount of travel. I did something like 35, 40 trips a year to Korea and back.
Wow.
So that is pretty much every week. And a lot of that was, unfortunately, just big company mishandling appointments. You arrive and, maybe the meeting you were there for isn't happening this week. So then you come back next week.
Wow.
But that's across the world, right? So
Well, you got your airline miles out of it.
yeah, I did get those, but that wasn't the best, kind of way to keep me. Also, my family, started feeling the strain of me being away all the time.
Did you have kids at this point?
Yeah, we had kids. They were already relatively grown by then. Yeah.
And so where did you end up going?
Quit. Went at Geneva show up to Piëch and Koenigsegg, whom I was in touch with for many years. By that point in time, wrote a couple of emails, met each other at a couple of shows. I said, yeah, Christian, I'm leaving Genesis, and is there anything fun we can do together finally? Because it's been a few years of us talking. And he said, yeah, actually, we did get some investment, and we're going to be building up a brand new product line, which eventually became the Gemera, and why don't you come to Ängelholm and see what we're up to, and we'll take it from there.
So most designers looking for a job like kind of network, like, hey, is there anything over at like General Motors, or is there anything over at Nissan? You roll to this guy who's making these crazy cars in, of all places, of Sweden. Was there a point, like now you're a parent, you're a husband, does your wife say to you, hey, why don't you get a job at General Motors?
No, I mean, she's an even bigger risk taker than I am, and she's usually the one with a real, hunger almost for risk. She always goes for it. So we did pre-discuss that I will speak to Christian and see where he stands.
So it's in your DNA to look for these very unique opportunities.
Well, I mean, think about it. Why would I go to GM and go from one hive mind to another hive mind? At that point in time, I realized that the scale of the company is nothing inherently wrong with how they build cars. It's just not where I would feel at home, right? And then I did have that hunger and itch for building more sports cars. After Lamborghini, after Bugatti, and then going to Genesis, I really did think we were going to build more on the performance GT style than on outright laid-back luxury. And the brand is balancing those two aspects, but very often leaning on the laid-back luxury side.
Yeah.
Like they're not making things that are driver-focused, and then Essentia was a wonderful concept, but it's now, like 7 years since we showed that, and it's not on the road. So I guess I shouldn't have stuck around for that.
Yeah.
The decision was right. And had I gone to GM or had I gone to another company, I would probably be working on another, I don't know, mid-size sedan or a mid-size truck platform right now. I was desperately hungry for performance, world records, speed records, lightweight engineering, merger between design and engineering, where you do something that is so incredibly, let's say, focused on a goal in terms of its performance that it ends up looking gorgeous just because it's to that extent refined, And then in my mind, Koenigsegg was a company that I aspired to. I saw them in the limelight of tip of the iceberg as far as innovation was concerned, and creating these vehicles that beat world records. And one man's dream, another pretty cool idea, was that working with a founder and not working with a committee-led company, not working with a big board of decision makers, but here's a founder, you go up with your idea, and if they embrace it, it goes on a car. If they think it's crap, well then.
I asked this question of a guest of mine last night who's also design. And I asked him, what do you think it best suits car design? I guess you could call it hive mind, or the committee approach to deciding what designs work, or the Harley Earl one man's vision? Which one do you think is more conducive to creating a successful design?
So if the choices are as binary as those two, I would say the dictatorship is more conducive to good design than the hive mind approach. But I don't see it as quite as binary as you just described, because
what are the moving parts?
The moving parts is you hire top talent because you rely on their input and you rely on their opinion and you rely on their talent. So it would be silly for you to come in and kind of outright decide every time you're in the office or in a studio. You hear, you listen, you brainstorm, you discuss, but then you still make the executive decision and taking into consideration that which you heard. So yeah, it is, in a way, it's basically a mix between everyone has a vote, but ultimately only one vote counts. But that one final vote takes into account what just happened on the voting floor, right? You do listen, because those are cherry-picked individuals whose opinion matters. In a bigger studio where you're not necessarily cherry-picking people and you just have maybe legacy teams that you've inherited, it's dangerous to allow that level of kind of parliamentary discussion. But in a small team where you are really, a bit like Apple with their design team, really hand-picked individuals whose opinion you can trust, whose motivations you're aware of. They're not just saying that to make sure you stumble and get punished for the mistakes, but they're really on board and they're non-political. It makes sense to listen and then decide.
So what was your experience at Koenigsegg?
It was pretty good. I know a lot of people find that company tricky to work at. I found it good. For me, it was good. I learned a lot from Christian von Koenigsegg. I spent a lot of time in engineering, much more than ever before. I learned a lot in terms of what goes into putting a car together from, start to finish, and not just the design aspect of it, but everything from supply chain management and issues with unions to prototypes and testing, road testing and crash tests, and a far wider gamut of experiences than a more silofied bigger OEM experience would ever provide.
All of us here at MotoMan are super excited to not only have the podcast back, but for it to be its own show. And there we look to you for a little assistance. Can you help us grow the show? 2 really easy ways to do that. First and foremost, if you're reaching out via YouTube or other streaming platforms, you click on subscribe, notifications, or more importantly, share these episodes with your friends, especially on Reddit. Now, if you're downloading these episodes, listening via podcast platforms, we'd ask you to rate us. The good stars are wonderful, but leaving a written review would be even better, especially sharing who was your favorite guest. So with that, I am incredibly grateful for your assistance in help growing this. And now, back to the episode. I gotta ask, something I always have found fascinating about Koenigsegg, and this is from my experience both going to school in Europe as well as living and working in Europe and actually managing people. Did Sweden get in the way of building cars, developing cars? Because you think about the crazy regulations specifically to cars and taxation on cars there. Was this an issue in developing cars for you guys?
Not necessarily, no. I mean, Sweden does have a proud tradition of building cars, obviously with Volvo and Saab first and foremost, and Christian's company also ranks now in the success stories of Sweden. I would say the main obstacle I saw in Sweden is part of that kind of lagom mentality. I don't know if that needs to be explained, but
Maybe you should explain.
yeah, kind of a model that encourages average. Like just be good, be average, enjoy life, do average things. There's no need to jump too high, and you won't sink too low by, just kind of stay put. Don't, and that's where
it works there in that society.
Well,
only country I ever went to where I went by myself, and within like 24 hours, I'm turning down invites of all these things people have brought me to, like, come do this, come see that, come see that. It was amazing. No other country I can say.
Super friendly people, wonderful people. I really enjoyed them. But the standouts like Christian, obviously, they are anything but average. So that I'm sure that it took a bit of reality distortion and bending the laws of universe to achieve what he did.
And how did you guys work together? Like, how was a match of your personalities?
Well, very well. Yeah, creatively very well. We're both car guys. He understood very well where I was coming from and some of my objections. I understood crystal clear where he was coming from. I think it was a very good working relationship.
And how long was your tenure there?
Also about 3 years.
Okay. And what's going through your mind? Like, okay, I've now created this third successful supercar, and this one's like crazy to another level. What do I want now?
Yeah, so it was more than one. It was two wonderful projects. It was a Gemera and CC850. And if I have to pick one, I'm probably even more proud of the CC850 than I am of Gemera. Well, Gemera is more innovative in terms of its packaging and architecture and presented a far bigger design challenge than the CC850. The CC850 was more rewarding because it's a classic Koenigsegg shape that I was able to kind of, with my team obviously, massage it to perfection. And it's the same transformation that you would see between a kind of a 1967 Ford GT Le Mans winner and the Camillo Pardo 2002 Ford GT. I love both those cars. I mean, the Le Mans winner ranks as probably my favorite exterior of all times, or it's always kind of up there with a couple of cars, just gorgeous. But I loved the homage as well because it just nailed it, It was everything about it was modern, was beautiful. You could never say, wow, this is a retro car. No, it looked perfectly good for its era in 2002, but still every line, every element had its roots back in the original. And I always wanted to do that to the Koenigsegg because I felt that the original car, again, love it, but was still a little bit on the clumsy side as far as surfacing and detailing is concerned. So to really button it up and put it together.
Well, the history of how it came together and all the different pieces, all different cooks in the kitchen, different companies involved.
And a very young Christian with still a lot to experience and a lot to learn. And that's still a fantastic foundation for their brand. And I feel really great that I had a shot at recreating that icon. And the idea to do it was mine. I presented it to Christian and he right away said, it's a great idea if you can handle it on top of all the other work that you guys have.
And what's the size of a design studio at a Koenigsegg opposed to a Volkswagen?
Like 6 people.
Oh, huge difference.
Yeah, 6 people. And I would say I did maybe, 75, 80% of the surfacing on those cars.
So that brings up a really important point in design. I think most people don't really know outside of design. Once you kind of get into management, especially like really high up, like the Lukes of the world, there's not as much of the actual, you're coming up, you're putting I guess not pen to paper, but you're doing the stuff in the computer. Kevin Hunter at Toyota is a good example of this. Like, he is the boss of Calty, which is an important studio for a very big car company.
Sure.
Yet it was his quote unquote sketch that became cars like the LC500 or the FT1, which became the Supra.
Right.
And it sounds like this is kind of what you do as well.
I'm not very well aware of how he works, Kevin Hunter. I've not been to...
as you move up in design, it sounds like even though you're the boss, you're still down in the trenches working with the guys and you're coming up with concepts.
More so, I would say, in my case than in most cases, because I learned how to create very close to production level exteriors in CAD. So
what does that mean?
That means that, so when you draw something, and you kind of, let's say, are successful enough with your drawing that, I don't know, a CEO of a car company picks it and says, that's the car, or whatever. Streamline the process. They pick the sketch. You still have to translate that sketch into a feasible model, right?
Yeah.
That will have not only the aesthetics of what you intended with the sketch, but also the feasibility aspects, so that the panels can be manufactured, that they respect the packaging constraints, that they respect the aerodynamics, the quality issues, all of that stuff. And I realized very early in my career that picking a sketch is folly. Like when you pick a sketch, you're picking something that is 0.1% of the way to a final product. So 99.99% is still left to do. And picking a sketch is a disservice to everyone involved, because that sketch may not translate. And there's been plenty of instances when sketches don't translate. And then they translate into a butchered car. Nobody's happy with it. Every presentation is a pain. Nobody walks away excited. It's all because the sketch that was picked perhaps wasn't the right sketch.
Yeah.
But at the sketch phase, it's very difficult to know what kind of stones are under that water, right? So I decided very early in my career, still in Volkswagen times, to stop showing sketches to anyone. I had a very distinctive sketch style and people really liked my drawings, but I realized it's not fair. I'm not getting what I want out of this process. So instead of showing sketches, I started building them in CAD, in 3D.
So this goes back to the gift of clarity.
Gift of clarity, and show directly the exterior as it will be in production. For sure, not every issue is solved, not every feasibility problem is solved, but at least it's on package. At least
But
you
you're
see
putting
that
like the right size wheels on it. You're putting
size
mirrors
wheels,
on the
mirrors.
car. The packaging is all right, so the engineers
you also
get it.
cheat. You cheat, but you cheat knowing where you cheated, and you know that you can rewind on those cheating points.
Like,
So,
what's a cheat you can get away with?
for example, you keep the tire OD always, never scale the tire OD up, but go half an inch larger on the rims, and scale the wheel arches by a few millimeters down, so you have tighter fitment of the wheel to the body. So you do these sorts of little tweaks here and there, which, by the way, later you can fight for. Because later you can say, all right, you think you need that particular wheel envelope. What kind of wheel model did you run? Oh, it had square edges for the tire. How about we put some camber on those tire profiles, and then run the envelope and cut off those corner cases. You don't need full bump, full steer, or you can cut off corner cases and get smaller wheel potatoes in place. So you stop being quote unquote an artist and you become one of the developers of the car, just coming from a design perspective. And you need that skill in your hands. You need to be able to build your exteriors up to a certain level, which in my case is quite high, because there's so much lost in translation. Just for a second, imagine that you're a trained composer and the only thing you know how to do is walk around and hum and whistle. If you don't know how to write your own score, I don't consider you a trained composer. That humming and whistling is not professional. Unfortunately, car designers, all they can do, in my mind, is hum and whistle, because all they do is produce drawings. Nobody needs that. You need to sit down and build your own CAD. That's the equivalent of writing score.
So that brings up a very good point. You know, we're around the corner here from, I would say, the Harvard of car design, your alma mater. Then you got the Yale up in Detroit. Then you've got Pforzheim, and you got some transport design programs in other places. Do you think the schools are teaching this skill set?
They're not.
Why is that?
Because they are service providers for the automotive industry. They provide what the automotive industry asks of them. And right now, automotive industry is in love with AI, so everybody's shifting to this AI workflow. The truth of the matter is, car companies are not interested in ultimate efficiency. They are ideally interested in preserving status quo. Like if they could just keep things as they are, stay big and bloated, employ 450,000 people, have design departments with thousands, everyone is perfectly fine. A lot of people are employed. A lot of people are getting paid. A lot of bosses have built their careers on that. So when you tell them, hey guys, you could do this job with not 1,000 people, but 6, that is not really, that doesn't feel like a jackpot.
I would say that's true of like the Stellantises of the world. I'm of the belief that Stellantis is in the business of making sure Europeans are employed. But then you look at the companies like the Hyundais of the world, and they go at a different pace. Maybe I'm only seeing it from the outside.
You are seeing it a bit from the outside. Hyundai has a huge commitment in terms of unemployment rates in Korea, where they do everything to bring in, basically to avoid any kind of unemployment.
What's an example besides a Tesla?
Tesla is a good example.
Tesla's a good, but outside of Tesla, I mean, a old-timey car company. What's an example of a company that's working on efficiency and trying to reinvent the wheel?
Honestly, I would not know, George. I simply would not know. If someone's doing it right now, it's not been brought to my attention.
I think it's
And I did have a conversation with board members of car companies where I would present a much leaner design process, and I could see the fear in their eyes. That's the only way I can describe their reaction, because that meant they didn't see the efficiency and the cost savings. They saw I might be actually losing my power within the organization because all of a sudden I don't need 1,000 people in my employ. You know, it's one thing when you're coming to a board meeting representing 1,000 strong team. Another thing when you're coming in representing a team of 20.
So our theme of like politics and authority kind of come back into this whole discussion.
Very much. You could see the fear in their eyes. That's the only way I can put it.
Okay, so this gets to an important juncture in your career. So you close the book at Koenigsegg.
Right.
What happens after that?
Yeah, a few things happened after that. I always wanted to run my own company, and first step in that sequence of events was starting up a design consultancy and running that. My wife and I decided we would be moving back to Berlin, which was our home base.
Great city.
Yeah, it's a wonderful city.
Great city.
We decided to move back to Berlin for the simple reason we already owned a house there, and starting out with my own design consultancy and my wife getting a job at a startup basically at the time, we figured we needed a low burn rate setup.
Yes.
So going home.
I spent 15 years in tech. I know that well.
Going home, yeah, we moved back in Berlin to our old house, which was comically too small for us at that point in time. We couldn't even bring our furniture in. Some of it stayed outdoors just because there was no space to fit it all in. After a few years of having well-paying jobs and traveling the world, we became bloated. So that was a interesting moment of shedding the unnecessary junk. So that design consultancy business went really well. We had some fantastic projects, really good clients.
Anything we could point to that say...
No, everything is under NDA. It's pretty wild because you're doing a lot of that work for even some of the top tier sports car companies, and they want your design input.
Really?
They want to go out there with "we did this in-house" narratives, which is cool. I mean, they're our clients, and I'm thankful for them being on board. But couple of things in the pipeline that hopefully come soon. That we will be able to actually say we did. Everything else is done in this kind of ghostwriter, I would say, mode. It's fine. I saw that design consultancy, and I still see it as vital for me because it allows me to see what other people are dreaming of and thinking about and building, both in the startup world and in the OEM world. And of course, there are plenty of NDAs and plenty of secrecy, but it just gives me the kind of perspective on the industry that I otherwise would not have.
Yeah.
But of course, the dream all along was to start this car business and to build our own car. So first step, design consultancy, earn a bit of money there. And then we decided, okay, now is the time, my wife and I together, let's do this car company thing and sell our house, reinvest all the money we got from the sale.
Okay, let's not drive past this.
All right.
You're a husband, you're a parent,
right,
and now you're a little older, and you and your wife jointly agree we're throwing stability into the wind, man.
Yeah.
And we're going to start a car company.
Yeah.
In the face of the industry changing at a breakneck pace. There was no like discussion of like, oh my God, this is not a good idea.
No, there was plenty of discussions, and actually, she, like I said, she's a bit more of a risk taker than I am, but I'm definitely not risk averse with my outlook on life. So both of us felt it was the right time. I don't want to sound presumptuous or arrogant, but I do feel like I achieved a few things in my career that gave me the right platform for the type of endeavor we're embarking on, or we embarked upon. And the connections, the friends, the I don't know, talent pool. Just it's a position that I'm in right now that I don't know many people that had that level of integration before they went and did what they did, and a lot of them some of them are very successful ultimately with their businesses.
Were you guys honest with yourselves that the chance of success is limited, but you're saying it's mitigated by the work you've done, not just the body of work, but the people you've worked with, the suppliers, the engineering. In other words, you basically come to the table with more than just, oh my God, we sold our house and we're funding it that way.
100%. If all we had at our disposal is the little bit of savings that would carry us through a couple of years of financial lull and a bit of money to invest, then we wouldn't have done it. It's anchored on both Ina's and my professional experiences in the industry. She was high up in marketing departments at car companies and did a lot of her own experiences in the automotive sector as well. So her side of the equation plus mine, we felt strong enough to do this. And I had a very clear vision that I firmly believed, and I still believe is the right thing for the sports car world. So yeah, but if you believe so much in your idea, we did have early phase discussions with a couple of investors, and sooner or later I realized that we have to put our money where our mouth is before we ask someone else to.
So you were actually doing kind of a road show before you sold the house.
That wasn't a road show. That was literally meeting someone for lunch one day. That wasn't much of a.
I love your honesty. This is the thing, and actually this is the thing Derek loves about you too.
Well, why exaggerate? There wasn't much of a road show at that point. It was
You'd be a good New Yorker. You really would.
I think I learned that in Germany or in Russia or somewhere.
Yeah.
No nonsense. Yeah. No bullshit.
So you took a lunch. You were looking for outside investment. Did you later on get outside investment?
We did now already many years after that original conversation. But yeah, it's basically we walked away from that particular meeting thinking, hey, whether this guy comes in or not, we can't not come in. We can't just say, well, let's just do this, but someone else carries the risk.
Oh, 100%. You got to have skin in the game.
You got to have all your skin in the game.
I helped raise money for a tech firm that I was working at back, and that's when I was living in England. And I'm proud to say that I went to Nokia, and I took a lot of money off of them, but they weren't interested until the group that was running the company came in for that round as well.
I think that's fair.
I think it's fair as well.
Yeah, it's a little bit like asking for, I don't know, a mortgage on a house and not having any down payment. It's like, well,
exactly.
You gotta, if you're committed, show us.
Or being a parent, your kid wants to buy the super cool sneakers. Like, okay, cut the lawn, see if you can make $20, and I'll throw in the rest.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Or whatever they
something like that, or they have their own little savings account where they put their whatever grandparents give them $100 here and there, and then they say we want something. Well, yeah, then use your savings first, and then if that's not enough, then
I have to brag a little bit. My nephew, he's now 13 years old. Mm-hmm. When he was, I want to say 9 or 10, he started a lemonade stand. It came up with the idea on his own, and he's selling lemonade, and he was the VP of the pricing committee. And he came up with 50 cents. And we're looking at him, why'd you come up with 50 cents? Because no one has 2 quarters. It's going to be $1. Are they going to ask a kid for change?
Brilliant.
Kids, I'm on top of the world. Now, it's Willie Bean's wonderful window washing was his last summer gig. He made like $4,000.
That's amazing.
And he banks it all.
Right.
Comes to me 2 summers ago. He goes, Uncle George, can we talk about ETFs? And at first I'm like, is that like some Lego thing you want? And then the ball finally dropped. Like a 12-year-old or 11-year-old's asking me about ETFs. Like amazing.
Amazing.
Anyway, okay. I'm like,
let's say I don't have that level of let's say business gene from the start, but I'm learning a lot.
Oh, I'm going to be working for him at some point. No doubt
awesome,
in my mind. So how many years ago did you start the company?
Well, officially we started it in 2024, beginning of 24, but we've used our design business to incubate a lot of the work that went into that company. Yeah.
And we're a couple of car guys, so tell me about the car itself.
Yeah, that's a good one. It's been with me for many years. 2006 was the first 3D model that I built of it. I had a website that was called angrycardesigner.com back in the day, and it was a blog, and I put it up on that blog, and it received quite a bit of passionate support. So I knew there was something special in that design, and I sat on it for all these years. My main issue with the way sports cars have developed is that they have prioritized ease of use. And by ease of use, I mean really everything, not just how they drive or how they provide driving feedback to the driver, but also getting in and out of the car and cup holders heated and cooled and screens and audio systems, and just became this elaborate kind of let's tick every box type of exercise.
Screens annoy the crap out of me.
Me too, right? And then you look back at the older cars, and somehow you'll have a friend of mine giving me a ride in his very modded Exige that he tracks.
Oh, cool.
And then you're just like, oh, so that's actually more brutal than pretty much any other hypercar I drove over the last couple of years.
Magnificent.
Right? So it's magnificent. Then you think, can't we combine the state of the art in hypercars with the rawness of that exige.
Yeah.
And who else is doing that? And it seems like no one really is doing that. And electrification, hybridization, and then smart features, ADAS, right? Autonomous driving kits and rules and regulations. All those things have pushed car manufacturers towards more sterile, easy to use, incredibly high performance, but nevertheless completely neutered driving cars. And that's where I felt like, look, we can actually go back to basics, go back to what's actually valuable. And the funny thing is, when you meet a hypercar customer, I don't want to generalize, not all of them, but most of them will ask you 3 questions. Is it a V12? If you say no, you can see that they are upset. If next question comes, does it have a manual? And you say no, that's another set of sad eyes. Oh, and then is it hybrid? Is it turbo? Is it this? Is it that? If you answer yes to those questions, even more,
Yeah.
you see the reaction. And I realized, well, it's interesting because the market seems to be where I have been for many years now. I have been equally, let's say, not thrilled with hybridization, with forced induction, with smart transmissions. Why don't we use this opportunity where I feel like, I've kind of earned my credentials, paid my dues, learned a lot, contributed what I could in the industry. Now I feel strong, but also the moment is right. It feels like the customer base is shifting towards this more
I would ask you, of course we want all this. That's why I bought the car that I got. And I own 2 Elises.
Those are cool.
Can you make that in a world of today?
It isn't easy. So it's not easy because there are some regulations that directly, make it challenging
Europe
for you.
Too.
No, actually, especially here, of all places. Europe has a so-called small series exemption, which sounds great. It almost sounds like if you're in small series, you're exempt. Well, you're not exempt from many things, but you're exempt from a couple of things.
Okay.
And that, for example, includes some of the passive safety systems like ADAS, like the autonomous driving stuff, and alcohol sensors and cybersecurity stuff.
Yeah.
So once you get rid of at least that bloat, you already have a more drivers-focused car. You still need to make sure you're emissions compliant on your engine, and we have a fantastic relationship with an engine builder, and we're working on that full speed. That's where most of our development budget and time is going, into emissions compliance and other homologation topics.
Are you able to be exempt from, because you still have the hurdles of electrification over the years in Europe? Are you exempt from that?
You are so far. It's not clear because they're revisiting those hard kind of dead ends. These deadlines.
I like the way you put that, dead ends. I'm going to steal that material from you.
It's dead end, effectively. Deadline in other speak, but it's dead end. So they're revisiting that because Porsche is not interested in complying, and some of the bigger players are saying no, that's not going to work for us either. So let's say it's a little bit in flux at the moment. But anyway, small series is a different game. Like, for example, in small series, you don't need to do fleet averages. That's already something, right? So you don't need to produce an EV alongside your ICE car just to make sure they balance each other out. Small series means you make few enough cars that you basically don't matter. As long as they're safe for the driver and for people around those cars, that's all that matters. The actual value of the emissions that they produce, we still have to comply, but we're only making a few cars. So.
Okay, so let's step back a little bit. You said a relationship with an engine manufacturer. Right. I've seen the car. I've seen the mock-up you've got. And the only way to describe that, the engine and the intake plenum in the back of the car is it's porn. Yeah. Full stop.
Yeah.
Who's the engine manufacturer?
Yeah, so it's Hartley Engines out of New Zealand. Great guy, Nelson Hartley and his team. Hartley family is pretty famous in the racing world. Both Nelson and his brother Brandon raced their whole lives. Brandon is actually an ex-F1 driver and a 3-time Le Mans winner as well. So it's a family with high racing pedigree.
Yeah.
Nelson's been an engineer his whole life. Yeah, so he's an engine builder, master engine builder, and this is his first complete clean sheet of paper engine, which we're very excited about. We already fired up a 4-cylinder version of that 12 for emissions testing and for durability. That has been running on dyno, showing incredible performance. It's a 4-cylinder, so it's 1/3 of our eventual 12, pumping out 440 horsepower, naturally aspirated, no forced induction. We are contemplating right now going the 48-volt route for our starter motor, but I would hardly call that electrification.
Yeah.
It's just a slightly
I love the efficiency of those systems. Yeah. Mercedes does an excellent job with the integrated starter generator motor, and I actually did research and did an episode on does it make the car more reliable? And the answer is actually yes for that part of the car. The sad thing is when you have the air ride, you still have the same problems. Right. Now, in your car, you did something interesting, and I got to ask, was it design or was it for function? The crazy, beautiful intake plan. I mean, it's like a bundle of snakes.
I have to correct you, that's an exhaust.
It's an exhaust. Okay, I got that wrong. Sorry about that.
It's a hot V, so we swapped the intake and the exhaust, the cold and the hot side, and the intake is actually down low and comes from the body sides of the car, and you hardly see it. On the exterior, you see it as those NACA ducts right behind the door. And the exhaust is sort of front and center because it's where intakes normally are, right in the V, and the entire engine bay is exposed. So yeah, it's an Inconel 3D printed exhaust, gorgeous. And got
design or function?
Got to compliment Nelson Hartley on that. It's all him, and I think it's
so.
Function.
We got to make it look this way because it's going to work better this way.
Yeah.
And then you've got this. I think the only way to describe it, you've got this Lola ass where the wheels, like the tires.
Yeah.
Oh,
and we're going wider on the tires too. So
was that a design thing or was that a form thing?
So I remember earlier days in my career at the Bugatti. Actually, the Chiron has a relatively open back end with those two giant mesh.
But the tourbillon, they take it to another level.
But when I was working on the Chiron, we had a few engineers on the CFD side, computational fluid dynamics, that's aerodynamics testing, saying that effectively behind the rear wheel there should just be no car. Because they want to extract a lot of that heat from the engine bay, and they want to extract a lot of the kind of stagnant air from the wheel wells.
So it doesn't make the car less efficient cutting through the wind by opening the back of the car?
The only other alternative is massive long tails.
Oh,
if you don't want to go the massive long tail route, then actually sort of chopping off the back end is the right thing to do.
And it's so much cooler looking.
I like it. It looks like a motorbike with a kind of a big exposed rear tire, a bit of a Formula One rear end there.
I know it's after your time, but I shot the Bugatti Tourbillon.
Right.
And I'm not I love you, man, but I'm not a Bugatti guy. I guess I never thought about I'm going to own a Bugatti.
Neither am I, technically.
Now I want one. Because that Bugatti Tourbillon, it brings me back to like mid-60s Lotus with the stupid, what was it? I gotta come back to you on this one, but there was a Lotus race car that had this crazy ass end with wheels kind of coming out like that. And then Lola did all that.
Sure.
And Lola, I think, is the one that really made it popular.
Yeah. The T70 Lola was an inspiration for the car anyway. So for the Nilu, that's one of the shapes.
Now, okay, let's bring this conversation full circle somewhat. The name of the car, why is it the Nilu 27?
Oh, right. Well, 27 is already... based on what I said earlier in the podcast, pretty obvious. It's the racing number that Gilles Villeneuve raced with. And it's a number that I always used on my own private projects whenever I had a moment to design for the Angry Car Designer blog. There was always a number 27 somewhere in those designs. So that was a kind of I would say a mascot. So celebrating that heritage. Nilu is a name that Ina came up with, and I think it's wonderful. It's a combination of Nika and Lucia, which are our two daughters. So Ni from Nika and Lu from Lucia. And I don't like, in today's day and age, companies named after founders. I think that the ideal way, like think about my taste in music. Most of the bands I like in the scene where I'm a part of, they're not named after people who started those bands. They're named after an idea or a concept, and usually they're named in a way that is a vessel for emotion. Right? You've come up with a word that people don't automatically know what to do with. But through your work and through the body of your work, it fills with content and it fills with value. And then people say, oh, that name stands for these values. Whereas if you, first of all, name it with your own name, then that's very presumptuous in my opinion. That means everyone who works for your company works, quote unquote, for you, which I don't like. I think they should work for an idea and a vision, not me personally. And also when you name it with a word that you found attractive somewhere that already exists, then you bring the baggage of that word into the story of your company. So we did want a new word, and we wanted it to mean something to us. And I think the idea with Nilu is pretty cool.
Give me an example of a band that you listen to.
You probably wouldn't know, but Sumac, Isis, Old Man Gloom, a bunch of Aaron Turner projects. But it's primarily a very dark, very artsy, underground, heavy music.
It's kind of learning about you, my friend. The engine.
A bunch of weird stuff.
Yeah, I think that's part of your charm. So I think that's why we get along. We both have weird taste in things. I got to go back to the engine for a minute.
Right.
So, like Range Rover, successful company, wouldn't you say? Successful?
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah, they print money with it. Range Rovers, the Defenders.
Yeah.
They can't afford to build their own engine,
Right.
so they just buy one off the rack from BMW.
Right.
How can you afford to go to this guy on the other end of the world to make this crazy new engine?
I can only say it's very expensive.
Okay.
It's
I
not.
have good taste.
It's not cheap at all. But what I did was, from the very beginning, I kind of looked at the entire, in my mind, bill of materials for the
Yeah.
car, and I thought, okay, there are things here that I'll place the ultimate value on, and there are other things here that I'll compromise on. And the chassis, monocoque, cabin, ergonomics, what the person, driver, passenger experience is vital. I don't want to compromise on that. So I don't want to say we're going to build this atop of an existing car's monocoque,
Yeah.
right? Because that's effectively, that is the entirety of user experience as far as driving the car is concerned. That's where it's at. And then another item was the engine. And I did look at a couple of engine options that were on the market, and none of them were actually low-hanging fruit, so to say.
Mm-hmm.
If you want an official endorsement from a car company, good luck with that. Most of them will not even consider that from liability and risk and all those perspectives. Getting endorsed by a car manufacturer the way Pagani did in the early days that's what Pagani did. I don't know many others who were able to do that.
Yeah.
Buying blocks from used up junkyard cars, that's a supply chain limit, because what if you run out of
Yeah.
those cars? And still, what if you don't get the kind of user experience out of those blocks that you want? So that's one of the reasons why some of those hypercar companies use V8s, because those are readily available. Pick them up where you want, junkyard blocks. I wanted a V12. That also limited the scope of research. We looked at a couple of V12s that we could get our hands on. Performance wasn't there. Weight targets were not there. Rev limits were too low. Just heavy, bloated luxury car engines that weren't doing the job for us. So then we started redoing the math of the whole business case of the bill of materials and considering our own engine in it. And then the Nelson's company showed up, and Nelson works in a way that is very similar to me. He's very hands-on. He builds his own CAD. He sits there, creates his own geometry. So there's a few loops of redundancies and managerial kind of layers eliminated. So we are doing this in a very efficient way. But yeah, it's a brand new engine.
So you talked about the manual. Are you doing that in-house, or is that Nelson does anything?
No. So the manual is actually an off-the-shelf component. In the show car, we use the manual from Italian company called Cima. Cima has supplied manuals for Pagani and for Koenigsegg, so their manuals have already an extensive amount of relevant applications.
Yeah.
And they're working with us. They're one of our partners in the project.
So give me like 3 examples of things, the biggest challenges you're facing in literally bringing a new car company to the forefront, and put the money part aside. We already kind of talked about that.
Yeah, I would say it's a frustration of mine, but it's something that we know we need to deal with. The amount of time, resource, and mental space that is dedicated to fulfilling laws, regulations. That part of the equation, where I understand it must be done, but a lot of the times these regulations are written for, I'll exaggerate for a second, for a lawnmower, and you're designing a Formula One car, and you're like, what? Like, how am I supposed to make this object comply
And I
with?
assume you're talking to a wall when you try to explain it.
Obviously, so you're no one, you're small.
Yeah.
Your concerns are not necessarily on anybody's agenda, and we went, actually, Ina and I, to a couple of meetings with CARB, for example, talking about their plans for the future, how they're going to tighten regulations, and we did voice our concern. They took note of us, but
Yeah.
I don't know whether that's going to
Yeah.
make it anywhere. So yeah,
Thank you.
the fact
Don't
that the
call us, we'll
world,
call you.
basically the world doesn't want these types of cars to exist, and not because the world has an issue with these types of cars, but because they're so irrelevant and so little in their numbers that they don't appear on anyone's radar.
When you say the world, you mean the regulators, not the people.
The regulators.
Yeah.
The regulators.
We want
the politicians. Yeah, the politicians. They don't want these cars to exist.
They don't want anything fun.
They don't want, no. They just want, boring.
They want you to just drunk and stupid. Did you know that
Sober and stupid probably.
No, they don't want you sober.
Okay.
For example, we're in a cigar lounge, plus I can bring this up. You and I, we could go to Manhattan Beach there, walk up and down the beach. If I walk down the beach with a cigar, I can get arrested.
Yeah.
But if I walk down the beach smoking a joint, no one will say boo.
Interesting.
Think about that. Anyway, I go off on a tangent.
Yeah.
So, okay, regulations, which totally could see that one. What are two others that stand in the way of the success of something like this?
I don't think there's anything standing in the way of our success. We have plenty amount of tailwind, both from the customer community and from fans, from the media. We've been embraced, so I feel very fortunate with how this project and how our new company has landed. I would say the challenges that are more kind of day-to-day challenges. I worked for bigger companies, and I'll give you an example. You go to the Quail at Monterey Car Week with Genesis or with Bugatti, and you have a PR company, and you have 20, 30 people from the mothership traveling out for the event, and the PR company issues out beautifully resolved agendas for everyone to know when you're required to be where, what exactly you need to do on that day, what are the plans for dinner that evening. And you are there basically now, in hindsight, you are a VIP guest at your own company's event.
Yeah.
Then with a smaller company, let's say with Koenigsegg, you're a handful of people. It was also COVID time, so very few could travel. We're there, unloading the boxes, hanging up merch for the people to buy. Then you have to man the stand. You have to talk to the customers. It's everything. But there's still at least a good handful of people to do that. And finally, last year, Ina and I are two. And it was really like, okay, who's going to hunt down the sandbags for our beach flags because they keep toppling over? And where is the car? It's not here, but the presentation's in 20 minutes. Oh, it got stuck. The tire popped on the truck. It's not going to make it in time. Oh, by the way, it's been stopped by the cops. So now it's been stopped by the gate, and now they won't let it through the gate. And people are waiting, and people are saying, Sasha, were you kidding? There is no car. No, it's coming. Wait. And then you have to do the unveil. But the truck opens the door finally, and the car rolls out without the covers on it. So what kind of unveil are you going to have if the covers are not on the car? And they're not on the car because the wheel is broken, because now we have to fix the wheel before we get it on the awards ramp. So the experience of going from basically working for an existing institution to being just the two of you that first year was hell. It was hell, but rewarding in some ways because you kind of got yourself to blame. You can't blame anybody else. You did this.
Startup life, man, it's a brutal mistress.
So that was it.
So what's the timeline now?
Well, we're working flat out to have a driving car for next summer. We've kicked off on
with the 12-cylinder.
With the 12-cylinder. 12-cylinder is supposed to fire up this winter. We're working towards that. All the purchase orders have been made. All the developments have been concluded. So we're now building up our first running engine that we can't wait to fire up and hear that.
And you've got customer orders.
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
Can you share how many?
A third of the total run.
What's going to be the total run?
There's 54 road-going cars, and there's 15, not strictly speaking, road-legal cars.
So, 27 times 2.
Yes.
Got
and
it.
15 units for kind of straight-piped, monster.
And I know this conversation is very much focused on, like, the entrepreneurial side of you,
right.
But I'm going to ask again. Are we funded to make those 54 cars?
We're working on that. We already brought in some significant funding this year. There's a few more in the pipeline.
Yeah.
What we're not doing is we're not burning our customers' deposits. Mm-hmm. That's something that stays in a separate account just because we feel like they shouldn't carry the risk with us. The risk is ours.
And what's been the reception of people? Maybe not the people who could write the check, because it's not a cheap car. How much?
No, it's around about over 3 million.
Yeah, so this is Bugatti territory. Yeah. What's been the reception of just like car freaks?
Great. The reception has been great. So first of all, a lot of the customer community I know already because of my time at Bugatti and at Koenigsegg, and some of them have cars that I worked on in their garage. So they embrace and welcome us as a new player.
How much did a Bugatti? That's interesting. I didn't ask you this. How much did Bugatti get you in front of customers?
Inadvertently, it happens. You're not the sales representative, but a lot of the customers want to meet the designer, and you are at an event, and your PR person brings somebody by and says, "Please say hi to this person. They just bought."
And you go to this person's house.
Not necessarily. I would say almost never, but yeah, sometimes you keep up that relationship. They see you at another show, they come
Yeah.
up and they say, "Hey, you're the guy who did my Chiron. That's pretty cool." And then exchange cards and stay in touch. And
Did you have those kind of relationships at Lamborghini as well, or is it just
no,
too big of a company?
Lamborghini is too big of a company, and I was too young of a designer.
Yeah.
Still in the trenches. Bugatti, I had a little bit more visibility due to the role that I played in the
That's
company.
what I found fascinating. Like I told you, I never wanted a Bugatti before. Now I want one.
Right.
Partly because of the Lola S,
Right.
partly because of no screens. But they told me about some of the owner engagement they do.
Yeah.
They do this, like, they close down tracks. Porsche does that too. However, they close down like NASA. And you get to drive your car at NASA. Or they close down the F1 track at Vegas
Right.
before the F1. And it's like, I mean, you could have just closed down an F1 track in Texas, but no, you had to do Vegas.
Right.
And there's just something so baller about that I love.
Yeah. Well, they have a lot of financial firepower to do these sorts of things. We're a bit more modest at this point in time,
Yeah.
but we will scale up to that level.
Yeah.
I have no doubt about that.
Okay, so you and I have covered a lot today. And this is your first time on the show, so you may not be familiar with how I like to wrap these things up. But what I like to do is turn it around to you and ask, what are the 3 aspects, 3 experiences in your life, it could be 3 people, that led to the success, and granted, your story is still being written, led to the success of Sasha?
Oh, yeah, it's really tough to single out. I had a kind of a kaleidoscope of a career with a lot of things happening and a lot of different encounters. But I would have to say my parents, obviously, putting me on track, supporting me, and making it possible for me to pursue my dreams. So 100% without them wouldn't be here today.
The level of, put aside the money, the level of investment your parents made in you is
Yeah,
unreal.
100%. My wife, obviously, we met when we were 17, and she's been the kind of catalyst and the brains behind a lot of the stuff we did, both in her own career and also in our joint careers already now. So definitely without her, none of that would happen. And then on the design
Let
side,
me ask you a question about that. You met her young.
yeah,
So you're a young kid, you live in a new country. I speak to we have a lot of interns, and I speak to my interns, and they ask about this kind of stuff. Not that I'm the pinnacle of relationships, but did you understand the value of how important that choice is in your life at such a young age?
it's really difficult to kind of revisit my mental space when I was 17 years old, but I do have an example of, my parents having met when they were younger, so I wasn't necessarily in the mode of, I'm just going to screw around until I'm in my late 30s and then settle down type of person. That's not how I felt. I thought I'm going to meet someone special, and then hopefully and fell in love with her, and that was my special person.
Good man.
So I don't know. There was no big strategy involved, just the gut feel that this is the right thing. Yeah.
Okay, so number 3.
Number 3, I would have to say a few of the people I met in the industry, and start with Derek. He was my mentor in school, and learned a lot from him, and a good friend in the years after. And then already at the Volkswagen design, I have to mention Achim Anscheit, Thomas Ingenlath, who was later a Polestar CEO, but at the time was my design manager, my boss.
Yeah.
Walter da Silva, great taste, wonderful intuition,
body of work.
Where to go with projects. A very interesting relationship between us. Started off with a massive fight, but ended up in being allies, and he supported me a lot. So he opened a lot of doors for me ultimately, but it did start off on an epic low. And then Christian von Koenigsegg, I learned a lot from that guy and being there in that company. So
has he become like an advisor of sorts to your company?
No, I wouldn't say that. Obviously, he has his own company to run, and he's a competitive guy. So I don't imagine that there's going to be much advisory coming from him. But I did travel to Sweden and show him the images of the car before we unveiled it, as a kind of bit of courtesy. And also, I just wanted to hear his input.
Yeah.
He loved it. And during my time in Sweden, we were good friends. So we did spend a lot of time outside of work and sharing stories and visions and ideas and philosophies. He's quite a interesting guy.
So if now at this point, if I were to turn this episode around to the audience, and solicit them for feedback on A, your car, or B, what would be interesting in this crazy supercar space, what would you want to know from the audience?
Well, what do I want to know from the audience? I just hope that there's still old school car passion out there, and that these products and my love for them lands on a fertile ground. As of today, I feel like it's still there. Hope that it carries on this way, and because ultimately, we're not working for the ultra rich, and in a way they are the ones buying the cars, but fundamentally I'm working for the kind of a 12-year-old kid inside each one of our customers, and the eventual 12-year-old kid who's going to buy a poster or a scale model and hopefully catch that bug, catch that passion, catch that disease that I caught when I was little, and just passing on the torch. I had a wonderful time in this career, in this industry, fulfilling some of my childhood dreams. I just hope that kind of resonates with some people listening, and they can also feel better pursuing whatever it is that they're pursuing. Hopefully it's fire-breathing monsters, but yeah.
Sasha, I can't thank you enough for this amazing story. I look forward to getting together again to see each one of these stages come to life, especially starting that engine.
The pleasure was mine. Thank you, George.
Thank you, sir.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Till we see you in the next episode, bis später.
Bis später.